Dan stepped out of the small exploration pod and looked at the silent valley stretching far under the pale light of the distant sun. He had traveled to many planets across the frontier, but this world felt different. The air was colder, the wind moved slower, and even the soil felt older, as if it carried memories from ages no human had ever touched. His mission was simple. He had to map the region, gather samples, and send daily reports to the station in orbit. Nothing unusual, nothing dangerous. At least that was what he had been told. He walked ahead with his scanner humming in a steady rhythm. The land was empty, quiet, peaceful. For a moment, he wondered if the universe was finally giving him a calm assignment. He had spent years around storms, broken reactors, and strange creatures, and he longed for a moment of silence. He breathed out and felt a little warmth inside his chest. This place could be good, but the calm did not last long. The scanner beeped with a tone he had never heard before. It was not a warning tone, not an alert, but something sharper. Something that meant the device had detected something it was not trained for. He knelt down and brushed his hand over the cold ground. A faint pattern shimmered, almost like a carved mark. Not a natural crack or a random scratch. It looked intentional. He followed the pattern and found more of them. Some were wide like paths, some thin like writing, and some curved like symbols. Dan felt a strange pressure behind his thoughts. He had walked into something unknown, something left behind by someone else, someone who studied this land before him. He tapped his wrist communicator and tried to send a message to the station. The device blinked with a red light that meant the message was blocked. Not failed, blocked. Something on the surface was interfering with the signal. That meant he was alone until he fixed it. He sighed and started walking again, following the strange marks. After a while, he reached a slope that overlooked a wide field. At first, he saw nothing unusual, but when his eyes adjusted to the pale light, he noticed thin structures standing silently across the valley. They were tall and narrow, like stone towers without openings. They had the same markings carved across them. He felt a chill along his back. This was no simple field. This was a place built by someone intelligent. Dan approached the nearest tower and touched its cold surface. The structure responded with a soft vibration. He stepped back, surprised. The vibration grew stronger, then a faint echo spread across the air. A distant rumble followed. He looked around and saw shapes rising from the ground. Not machines, not animals. Something in between. The shapes formed slowly, as if waking from a long sleep. Their bodies were smooth and dark, almost like shadows made solid. They had no eyes, no faces, no mouths, yet he could feel them watching him. Dan lifted his hands, showing he meant no harm. He had faced strange beings before, and learned that fear made everything worse. But the shapes did not move with fear. They moved with certainty. They approached as if they already knew him, as if they had been waiting. A soft pulse spread in the air. It felt like a thought, but not his. A message pressed into his mind. Not words. A feeling. A question. It wanted to know something. Dan tried to respond. He thought of peace, exploration, curiosity, not danger. The pulse trembled, almost confused. Another vibration came from the tower, stronger than before. The shapes turned as if listening to an order. Their bodies shifted and tightened. The air thickened with tension. Dan sensed that something had changed, and whatever message they had received was not friendly. A second pulse struck his mind, this time heavy and sharp. The meaning was clear. They believed he had done something serious, but he had no idea what it was. Dan shook his head and spoke out loud, even though he knew they might not understand. He said he was only exploring. He said he touched the tower by accident. The shapes responded with another pulse that felt like a wave of disbelief. Then the pulse shifted into something stronger, something that felt like a declaration, then stepped back as the ground vibrated. The entire valley seemed to awaken. More towers across the field lit up with a dull glow. More shapes rose from the soil. The silent planet no longer felt empty. It was alive, awake, and everything was staring at him. The pulse returned with absolute clarity. It carried a meaning that hit him like icy water. The moment he touched the tower, he had triggered a signal. And the signal was a declaration, not a greeting, not a request, a declaration of conflict. He had accidentally pressed something ancient and sacred, something that marked him as a challenger. And these beings did not take challenges lightly. They accepted them without hesitation. He had not just touched a tower. He had declared war on the most deadly species alive. Dan felt his stomach twist with shock. The beings did not act with anger. They acted with calm certainty, as if following a code older than their world. They spread across the valley, forming a wide circle around him. He had seen many species across the frontier, but he had never seen one that declared conflict through ritual instead of aggression. This made them more dangerous, not less. He forced his breathing to stay steady. If the beings respected rituals, then maybe they respected strength, logic, or honor. He had to understand their rules before something irreversible happened. Dan placed his palm on his chest and bowed slightly. He hoped the gesture showed peace. The shapes paused, and another pulse touched his mind. It was softer this time, curious. They wanted to know something about him, something important. He stood tall, slow and steady, and let his thoughts speak for him. He was human. He came from a world where life grew through hardship, a world where mistakes led to learning, not endless conflict, a world where even the smallest creature fought with determination. The pulse vibrated with interest. He felt them testing every part of what he shared. Humans were new to them, strange, unpredictable, yet the shapes stepped back slightly. For the first time, the circle opened. Dan felt a spark of hope. Maybe humans were unknown to them, but unknown did not always mean enemy. He took a small step forward. The ground responded with a faint pulse, as if measuring him. He stayed calm. The valley watched in silence. Every tower hummed with a sound that felt like distant thought. The shapes pulsed again, asking something deeper, something about the strength of his kind. He thought of humanity's journey, people who survived storms, people who built cities from deserts, people who turned failures into new beginnings. He spoke about unity, courage, adaptation. The air shifted. The pulse became stronger, warmer, not hostile, studying, measuring, learning. Then a new pulse struck, not from the shapes, from beneath the ground. Something far larger and older had awakened. The towers glowed brighter. The valley trembled. The shapes stepped aside with reverence, allowing something unseen to rise. Dan stood still as the surface cracked open, and a massive structure lifted itself from the earth. It looked like a monument shaped by time and intention, its dark form towering above everything. The air grew heavy. Even the shapes lowered themselves. Another pulse hit his mind, stronger than everyone before. It was a voice without sound, a presence without form. It called itself the Watcher. It explained that this valley was a sacred arena used for trials. No outsider had ever crossed its borders before. The moment he touched the tower, the ancient trial began. Dan explained again that it had been an accident. The Watcher responded with calm certainty. In their tradition, accidents did not exist. Every action carried meaning. Every choice carried weight. But the Watcher also sensed truth in him. It sensed that humans were a species shaped by struggle and still rising. The Watcher asked him one final question. Did he stand for his species with full heart and truth? Not as a warrior, not as a conqueror, but as a being who carried the will of humanity. Dan felt a wave of pressure inside his chest. He thought about every human he knew. People who tried again after failing. People who stood with each other in times of need. People who believed in progress even when the universe seemed too big. He said yes. The Watcher grew silent. The valley stopped trembling. The shapes shifted again, calmer now, almost respectful. The Watcher sent a final pulse. It carried a new message. A declaration rewritten. Not war. Recognition. The humans were now acknowledged as a species worthy of standing among powerful civilizations. A species that might one day become a crucial force across the stars. The trial was no longer a threat. It had become an introduction. The towers dimmed. The ground settled. The shapes retreated back into the soil, like shadows returning home. The Watcher sank into the earth with slow dignity, leaving only silence behind. Dan stood alone once more, but something inside him had changed. He had entered the valley as an explorer. He left it as a representative of humanity, carrying the weight of something bigger than himself. He walked back to his pod and tried his communicator again. This time the signal worked. The station called him with worry, asking why he had not sent any updates. Dan looked at the quiet valley behind him. He knew he could not explain everything yet. Some things needed time. Some things needed wisdom. He simply told the station that he was coming back with something important. As the pod lifted off, Dan watched the valley shrink below him. He felt proud, not because he survived something dangerous, but because he proved something deep about humanity. They were capable of more than others expected. They were